Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, at this, the launch for Dominic's tremendous pamphlet, Fight Terror, Defend Freedom. All I want to say before handing things over to Dominic is this. The three men with me on the panel today are great friends of freedom and liberty. Jerry's work at Microsoft and then away from Microsoft was really part of, I hope you don't mind me saying, the inspiration when we set up Big Brother Watch, because we were aware that freedom and privacy were being attacked in wholly different ways in the new technological era. And our two parliamentarians, of course, need little by way of introduction to you. Let me simply say that in addition to being friends to freedom and liberty, they are great friends to Big Brother Watch. They both spoke for us at the Conservative Party conference. They are both here today, obviously, to support this pamphlet, and they are both two contributors of chapters to the forthcoming Big Brother Watch book. And so if you'd like to find out more about that book, do please go onto our website, bigbrotherwatch.org.uk, where you can register and sign up for our newsletter. And with that, please join with me in welcoming Dominic Raab.
Alex, thank you very much. I'm actually going to keep seated. I've just come off crutches, and last time I walked next to David Davis, he tried to sweep me over. So thank you all for coming this afternoon, and in particular to Alex and Big Brother Watch for their support in helping producing this pamphlet, and also to David for coming along. He's been looking at this for something like 5 years at least, and to Jerry, who really has a huge range of technical expertise on intercept evidence, which is something I'm going to come on to. They all bring expert insights in their different fields. Today, the government published its national security strategy, and it confirms, unsurprisingly, that international terrorism is in the top tier of threats to Britain. And we expect, interestingly, that looking through the NSS, there's no mention of prosecution or the justice system as a means of tackling the threat. And I'll come on to why I think that's a mistake shortly. We've got the Home Office counter-terrorism review coming shortly. So I think the key point here is after 13 years of a very authoritarian approach from Labour, we've got a real opportunity for change. So what should that change look like? Well, the last government presented counter-terrorism as a trade-off, asking us to forcing us to give up our freedoms as citizens, and the promise was that the state would make us more secure, make us safer. And as I explained in the pamphlet, I'm not going to sort of rehash all the points. I think that positive trade-off has turned out to be a fraud, a con. We've seen a huge range of erosions of our freedoms, but just last month we heard from Jonathan Evans in one of his episodic statements, public statements, we heard that the threat level, which rose exponentially since 2001, has not reduced but rather diversified. It's important to note that because we are less free and we are no safer, and that sounds like a pretty lousy deal to me. If anything, the threat has risen over the last 5 years, and I guess today I want to make the case, again, with colleagues and friends on this panel, that in the country that gave the world Magna Carta, we can fight terror and defend our freedoms. We've got an opportunity to look at this whole security issue differently. In the report, I make a number of particular recommendations that the Home Office repeals a whole range of criminal offences that stifle free speech, that it scales back random stop and search, that it phases out control orders, that it reduces pre-charge detention to 21 days at least. I think it could probably go down even further. And in each case, what I'm seeking to do is argue on the evidence, as well as the principle that we all support in favour of liberty, that we can restore the freedoms whittled away by the last government without reducing or jeopardising public protection. And I am confident in making that argument in front of you today. But just because I care deeply about Britain's tradition of liberty, I'm not for a second complacent about the security threat. And if anything, I'm just as concerned with all the hubris that accompany the controversial, authoritarian and largely unnecessary measures under the last government. But we've actually neglected, that fixation has led us to neglect key areas of law enforcement and, most importantly, prosecutorial strategy. Just to give you a few figures, between 2006 and 2009, so as the terrorist threat was rising exponentially, the number of terrorist suspects charged, halved from 54 to 27. whilst the numbers prosecuted and convicted, both those key figures, fell by 2/3. So the last government's fixation on new legislation detracted from law enforcement, and that is a key message that I want to get across in this paper. Now, based on my own experience, and I headed up the UK's war crimes team in The Hague, and we, between 2003 and 2006, and looked very carefully at the ICC, at the Yugoslavia Tribunal, at the Rwanda Tribunal, at how they used this hodgepodge of different international experience that they brought into the tribunals, how they used that and learned from it. And in preparing this report, I've also consulted widely amongst those involved, both in intelligence and law enforcement, in this country and abroad, particularly in the US. I haven't cited all of the people I've spoken to, and where I haven't is because they've asked and remain anonymous. At the end of this, I'm convinced not just that there are individual measures that we can take, but have failed to, but also that we just got to stop thinking about the justice system as being part of the problem, something to be circumvented with authoritarian administrative measures, and we've got to start thinking about the justice system as a weapon, and something that we can deploy to maximum effect to disrupt, to deter, and to diminish the actual overall size of the terrorist threat. So there's a range of bespoke tactical measures within our justice system we can make better use of. Post-charge questioning, withhold the offences of withholding encryption keys, plea bargaining, and most obviously lifting the ban on using intercept as evidence to prosecute terrorists. There's no mention of that in the security strategy, and we're getting the feedback that has been yet again punted into the long grass. But there's also, as well as these specific tactical measures, there is a broader strategic dimension, and that's why I think it's timely to start talking about this with the NSS today. In the US, for example, there's much closer coordination and integration, not just of intelligence and police. We've actually achieved that in this country, I think, over the last few years. MI5 deserves some credit with their regionalisation approach. But also getting the prosecutors involved. Prosecution is not just something that happens, or certainly not something that should just happen after an attack or a plot. In the US, for example, it's used proactively to disrupt criminal and terrorist networks and to try and keep them on the back foot. We've got this constant growing threat, and prosecution is used there to try and disrupt and reduce it. In the States, for example, and I spoke to their current DOJ counter-terrorism team about their current use of intercept evidence, and they make the point, Ken McDonald's made the point, it's not just about saying intercept evidence is this panacea sort of thing. It's saying, look, we've got a strategy, we use more plea bargaining, we get the intercept evidence, we deploy it in a counter-terrorism conspiracy, not against the key player immediately, against a minnow, someone on the periphery, and then we use that to try and elicit cooperation from them. We maybe offer a discounted sentence. They've got far more proactive use of plea bargaining, and that gains witness cooperation and testimony against the kingpins, the big fish, and the key players in a conspiracy. This has been used to dramatic effect in the States. It's decisive, it saves the cost of trials. Intercept is often the crucial evidence that secures a conviction. It's been suggested in the Chilcot report that it's peripheral, that it's not really central. In the States, it is critical, central in almost every counter-terrorist and organised crime case. So it works. Why aren't we learning that lesson here? It's not just in the States. I spoke to the former Australian DPP. I spoke to some of the Canadian law enforcement experts. So why aren't we learning the lessons here? What's the reason? What's different about Britain? Well, one obvious reason is the ongoing transcripts that we are encountering from the Home Office and GCHQ, the listening centres, particularly their resistance to using intercept as evidence, which is a critical component of the strategy we're talking about. So I've looked back to try and understand a bit better the reasons for this intransigence, and the Chilcot report in 2008 and subsequent reviews articulate some of their concerns. Now, I can't disclose all my sources, but I've spoken to some of the key officials here abroad, and there are just three basic points about this whole debate about intercept evidence I would make. First, Chilcot massively underestimated the potential law enforcement value of intercept as evidence. We know that from experience in the common law jurisdictions I just mentioned. I can also say on good authority that the assertion in Chilcot that intercept would not have led to a prosecution in any of the 9 control order cases they reviewed is, I'll choose my words very carefully, it is not a full and accurate reflection of the review that was conducted by counsel.
You mean wrong?
My interpreter is at my side. It is certainly true, if we use Intercept as evidence, that tasking of GCHQ will need to change. I don't doubt that. And I'm sympathetic to their fears that this is yet another broadening of their role. You've got to understand, GCHQ started out as military code breakers during the Second World War. They were then relied on to help with wider espionage and intelligence, for counter-terrorism. My experience of living counter-proliferation as well at the FCO. And then, of course, we've had this surge of the use and abuse of the internet and mobile telephony, which has expanded their responsibilities. Today, the National Security Strategy is talking about cyber warfare. You're going to need to use GCHQ for that. And now, there's this young, new backbench MPs wanting to pile on even more work with limited budgets, recommending they support prosecutions. I can fully understand why they are reticent, but I think we've got to look very carefully at the pecking order of priorities that we are giving GCHQ in the way we task them.